So, why was Dwayne selected as this year's winner? I'll tell you. It has to do with the nature of the award itself. The Irwin Efron Demystification Award is unique in that it honors those who've done research or interpreted research that helps to shine a light on some of the darker corners of our profession. Irwin Efron himself was something of a fox, a rascally character who liked to question conventional wisdom, who provoked us to think about media, marketing, and advertising in new ways, and who articulated his thoughts widely in the industry, both in his writing and in his public utterances. And though there were many other excellent candidates for this award this year, the jury felt that these Efron-esque qualities described Dwayne Varan to a T. Throughout his career, Dwayne has challenged the industry to embrace measurement innovation, but not to forget the basic tenets of science: the need for transparency, replicability, peer review, and validation. Dwayne first came to my attention through his work applying neuroscience tools to the development and evaluation of television content, work that made its way not only onto ARF stages, but also into peer-reviewed academic journals. He's been a frequent and oft-cited contributor to the Journal of Advertising Research, as well as to other publications, both academic and general. His involvement a decade ago with the ARF NeuroStandards 1 study helped to clarify industry understanding of tools for studying cognition, memory, and emotion in media. And like any good scientist, he tries to develop a body of theory that can help us to explain our world, and he contrives experiments to test those theories and see if they can be confirmed with rigor and consistency. But unlike most scientists, he's also very gifted at communicating ideas and connecting them to practical business applications. So it is this rare combination of science and art that makes Dwayne so deserving of the 2022 Irwin Efron Demystification Awards. So I'm honored now to welcome Brian Steinberg from Variety and Dr. Dwayne Varan, the 2022 Irwin Efron Demystification Award winner. Congratulations again, Dwayne.
Thanks so much, Scott. We're here with Dwayne Varan of Media Science and of many other accomplishments. He is the winner of this year's Irwin Efron Demystification Award. Congratulations, Dwayne. Good to have you here.
Thanks, Brian, and thanks for joining us today with us too.
Absolutely. I thought the first thing we can talk about is innovation. I know over the years you have studied many different ad formats, the way they work, the way people pay attention to them. What is it you think you've learned? What kind of cracks of code? What things seem to gain traction, especially now when people have so much more choice over whether they watch a commercial or not?
Yeah, I think the industry used to be one where the pace of innovation was about once per decade. Black and white to color, the rise of cable TV, VCRs and DVR, and even that was too fast for the industry. The industry couldn't cope with that. It took us more than 10 years to come to terms with cable or VCRs. But, now I think innovation is perpetual. Every year, there's major shifts in our landscape that occur right now. And I think the reason that's important is because if tomorrow looks like yesterday, the name of the game is efficiency. If you get better and better at what you did yesterday, you're going to be better and better positioned for what you're going to do tomorrow. But when tomorrow doesn't look like yesterday, some bits do, some bits don't. So at the core of that need now, above all, is innovation. And so no matter where you sit in the value chain, innovation has to be the core of what you do. This is a challenge for research suppliers just as much as it is for anybody else. I mean, for example, the world is moving to connected TVs. I'm not a prophet in saying that, right? It's pretty self-evident that, connected TVs are here to stay and this is the future. But yet most research suppliers, in fact, almost all research suppliers are still testing connected TV propositions on desktops. How does that make any sense? Or even worse, on mobile phones. So, we have as much of an obligation to keep up with the pace of innovation as anybody else. And you're absolutely right. There are new formats that come every day. And the beauty of that for the brand and advertiser is that, we used to live in a world which was one size fits all. You had to fit your problem into the conventions of the 30-second ad. And not all advertisers were equally, predisposed to that. I mean, some were better at that. Some categories were better at that. But that was the game. Now, there's so much variety of choice out there that you can pick the format that actually best suits your communication objectives. And this is, I think, one of the nuances that's not in the market yet, where people are much more deliberate about the ways that they're using these formats rather than just responding to the pitches that they're getting. So you're absolutely right. It's an exciting time. There are a lot of exciting opportunities there. There's a plethora of different kinds of formats out there. They all have their unique mechanics. They all have their unique DNA. And that's why research around that is just so vital and so important.
Is there any one particular execution that you think was you were kind of first to discover that this is gonna do it? This is the one that's gonna make everything different?
You know, there's probably over 100 formats that we've tested over the years. And one of the ones that does best, that's very simple, but which is not yet really all that common in our industry. Now, we first tested this model like 20 years ago. Like it's been around the block, but nobody's really doing it. It's what we call a telescopic ad, where you click on an ad and you go to long form content for that ad. So you see an ad, you click on it, you go to something longer. The reason I think that's so critical at this juncture is because shorter and shorter ads are becoming, you know, the convention. And that's not a bad thing. That's that, you know, you can have very effective short ads, but there's an opportunity there to use the short ad as the invitation, as the tease to pull you into something longer. So telescopic, I think, is the format which holds the greatest potential, which has not yet really been widely deployed in the industry.
That's pretty interesting. Kind of that has been around for a little while, and people do try and do things, see where people can, you know, use a QR code or that kind of thing to jump to something else. It's interesting kind of format. And
yeah, and one of the questions we always have to ask is whether our format is the chicken or the egg. And what I mean by that is is what we are doing finding the people who are already going to buy our product, or is there a genuine persuasion effect at work? And we did some great work a while ago looking at econometric modeling of that question. And we demonstrated that the telescopic ad format in particular was actually doing genuine persuasion. So that's one of the reasons why it's such a great model. It's not just kind of like sifting and finding people. It's actually persuading people. You know, if you see a feature in a car in a commercial, it just kind of like zooms by. You don't even know what the feature is. But if you have the opportunity to understand it more, you're much more likely to be interested in terms of, you know, purchasing the product, et cetera. So that's why I think that format is particularly well suited.
Yeah, very interesting. One thing I want to hit on a lot is the idea of attention. We're in an era where we're seeing all kinds of moves to new kinds of measures. People are looking at Nielsen, but they're also looking at 10 other vendors. You've seen a lot of the TV networks branch out this year in the upfront, offering a lot of new ways of slicing up audience. I think a lot of them try to get at the concept of who's watching what. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, you know, the idea of new currencies emerging and the idea of maybe that attention itself, someone's time engagement or time spent with, becoming more of a currency, more of a solid piece of negotiations for ad dollars.
Yeah, there's no question attention is the new pink. And that's a good thing. The focus on attention is actually really great. I think, unfortunately, the discourse around attention is poorly informed. And what I mean by that is the basis for our discussion on attention should be the scientific literature on attention. And much of the debate that we're having is not grounded in the science of attention. It's grounded in things that suppliers want to bring to the market. That's the wrong way for us to be talking about attention. And there's a lot of myths, I think, around this dialogue right now. I'll highlight just a few of these, Brian, to illustrate what I mean. The first myth is that we should be interested in attention. As advertisers, we shouldn't be interested in attention. We should be interested in inattention. And it doesn't sound like a difference. In fact, we define attention at Media Science. We define attention as the absence of inattention. And the reason it's such a big deal, we did this big study with, Media Science and Ehrenberg Bass for Google, where we looked at every major approach to measuring for attention in the academic literature. So this includes very complex measures like pupil dilation, right? I mean, all kinds of different measures around how do you measure for attention, what's best in class. And one of the things we discovered in that is that a lot of these measures correlate very highly when it comes to what is inattention. So inattention is a stable construct, but very few of the measures actually correlate when you're talking about what attention is. And the reason they don't correlate is because there's not one kind of attention. There's very different kinds of attention. And so this is the first kind of myth that we understand. We think that we can get at attention. We can't. It's too big an ask at this stage. We just need to focus on inattention. The second myth is that more attention is better. We've long known that's not to be the case. We long have known that very low levels of attention for some ads are actually more effective than high levels of attention. And this is, again, where we misunderstand attention. Attention is a threshold. If you don't have it, you've got a barrier to the ad having any effect. But once you have it, it's about a whole bunch of other things that you have to then. So attention is one hoop among many hoops that we have to jump through. But I think the biggest concern that I have is the new rise of what we would call synthetic measures of attention, which are these AI-based measures. This is really problematic on a lot of levels, but the biggest issue that I have with it is, where's the proof? Where is the independent validation? You can't have vendors grading their own homework here, right? You have to have proper independent validation against a proper ground truth. A lot of the measures that people are using in deriving that have nothing to do with attention. For example, sales lift. Sales lift goes into their model. Well, sales lift has nothing to do with it. It's true that if you have good sales, you have attention, but that doesn't mean that you can't have attention without the sales lift. And a model like that is going to penalize ads that deliver very well on attention, but just fail on all the other hoops. So there's a lot of, it's way too premature to be talking about this as currency. Right now, we should be talking about proper validation, independent validation of what these measures claim to do. Are we really measuring attention, or are we measuring something else? Or maybe nothing else. Maybe it's just a nothing measure.
I know this is the big debate in the industry right now. This everyone's talking about how to figure out measure audiences in different ways. I know this is stuff that people are really kind of trying to get their heads around. So it's a big topic.
Absolutely. It's a good discussion to have,
Yeah.
but it's premature for us to be, talking about deploying it in the ways that we're talking about it right now.
Yeah.
Too many people are drinking the Kool-Aid, Brian.
Another thing I know you say a lot is the idea of media environments. I know that in a different time, people had one. They watch a big screen. Now they can watch in a lean back mode, more of a lean forward mode. Certain things, certain shows correlate more to those different behaviors. What are you learning about how a media environment affects engagement and attention and someone's recollection of what they see on the screen?
Yeah, and of course, with the demise of the cookie, this becomes more important than ever. And we're bifurcating in terms of how we buy around programmatic and premium has to mean context in some way. So increasingly, it's going to be critical that we demonstrate the value. I think the biggest problem that we have in context is that we simplify it. We're too simplistic in the way we think about it. Like usually we're talking about something like congruity, funny ads and in funny shows. And that is an effect. There's no question about it. I mean, when you go into a funny show and then you go into the ad, you've warmed up the audience. I mean, much the way that like a stand-up comic will have somebody come in and warm the audience up before, because they're going to be more receptive to the jokes. So very clearly congruity is an effect, but it's just one of many different kinds of context effects. In fact, we've demonstrated over 10 different types of contextual transfer that work. And the reason it's important is the mechanics of how they work are all very, very different from one another. So for example, we've long demonstrated that news, contrary to, popular opinion, news is a superior environment. It's true, it's negative, but what happens with news is news activates your cognitive resources. You're thinking when you're watching the news, and you go into the ad environment with better access to your cognitive functions. So as a consequence, your memory pathways are significantly improved. So what we see with news is often a superior effect in terms of ad memory. So that's the mechanics of how news works. That's very different to sports.
Yeah.
Sports is about excitation transfer. You're really excited. You perceive the brand in that more excited state. And so the primary driver of the effect for sports is actually brand attitude and a change in how you perceive the brand. So very different mechanics. And this is the reason why it's so important for us to understand kind of each of these different kinds of contextual transfer effects, so that where ultimately brands want to be positioned is where they're turning to the right context relative to their very specific communication objectives. So if my objective is about memory, oh, look, news is great for memory. That's where I should go for memory. So these are the kinds of challenges I think that we face in the road ahead.
That's really interesting stuff. And you probably can find a different result for every genre and topic and different kind of show. That's a big
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. Environment's critical.
Yeah. Now, I know over the years, you mentioned this before about pupil dilation. I know that one of the things you look at sometimes are people's biological reactions to commercials and TV shows and different things they see on the screen. This is, I think, a difficult practice to people get their heads around. Where do you think neuroscience, in some sense, where do you think things are with this? And do you think it's at a level where people are trusting it?
Well, the neuromarketing, the ARF has done a great job. I mean, Neurostandards 1.0, was a real change in dialogue. It was, look, let's create a common discourse around what questions people should be asking about whether these tools are legit. There is no doubt that there is a need for the neuromarketing tools in the marketplace. And the reason is that when we're talking about, programs or ads, above all, we're talking about human emotion. We are interested in the journey of the consumer, of the viewer, and particularly in terms of their emotional journey. And the problem we have is this: people lack access to their own emotional journeys. So anytime you ask a person a question about how they feel about something, they're giving you the rational interpretation of what they think they must be feeling, which is actually not the same thing. It's actually very different. And so it's critical that we measure for emotion directly rather than indirectly. And that's what these newer tools allow. But just because you use a scientific tool doesn't make what you do good science. And the problem that we have as an industry is every day there's a new vendor in the market who thinks they can just use the tool and claim it as science, when in actual fact, you need the same. I mean, it's the same discussion we had about attention. You need proper validation, you need proper scientific method. I mean, there is a dialogue and a discourse around what that looks like. And so that's the need. There is still that need for good, proper, science to make these tools, weave the magic that they do. Great tools, great possibilities, but only if they're actually used properly.
Last thing I want to hit you with is, I think, an age-old question in the world of advertising, especially over the last decade or so. We always hear addressability is the holy grail of business. That send, Pampers ads to mothers who are expecting, car ads, people who would market for a new car, dog food to people who own dogs. But is this are we getting closer, farther? When do you think this actually becomes a more scalable technology that we're going to see at use more regularly?
I think the problem's not the scalability of it. I think the problems is that we don't get the fundamentals of it right. There's a lot of nuance to getting it right. And let me explain some of the things that I mean by that. So first and foremost, our research shows that category relevance, which is often what we're talking about here. It doesn't have to be. I mean, we can talk about addressability in a lot of ways, but usually people are talking about it in terms of, dog food for dog owners, like category relevance, right? Category relevance in our research only accounts for about 10% of the effect of an ad. 66% of the effect of the ad is the ad creative. So let's start here. If we want to be obsessed with one thing, what we should be obsessed with is ad creative. That's where the lion's share of our effect is. Now, if addressability means that instead of producing one $500,000, super production ad that emotionally really moves you in some way, right? And instead of that, we're now going to produce 10 $50,000 ads. Well, that's a losing proposition. 10 crappy ads, even if they deliver that 10% of relevance, is not going to be a substitute for what the 66% of a good creative ad is going to deliver. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the nuance of it is really very complex. We did a study where we demonstrated that in 30 days, 50% of what people are in market for has already changed. Now, it turns out that people are very stable when it comes to what they're not in market for. So if I change that question and say, what are you not in market for? That's 88% in 30 days. So that's pretty good. But if we're very fickle with what we want and what we like, and that means that if the data that informed our model is more than 30 days old, and in some cases, I mean, it's years old,
Yeah.
right? Then it's going to be a lot harder to deliver to that target. So addressability holds promise, but the promise, I think, in the market is exaggerated, and people should be using it in very deliberate ways, and it should go beyond category. It should go beyond category relevance. So, one of the things that we found, for example, with dogs and dog food, you may identify with an ad with a dog, but it probably has to be a dog like your dog. Like, I had Labradors, and if I saw a Labrador, maybe I'd respond to a Labrador, but that doesn't mean I'm going to respond to a Bulldog. So there's a lot of nuance to getting it right. And, again, when we tested a whole bunch of different addressable models, what we found was the most effective way of doing addressability? It was frequency capping. Something super, super, super simple to do.
Yeah.
A win for the media buyer, a win for the viewer. Everybody loves frequency capping. So, that's the kind of dialogue I think we should be having, is let's get some of the fundamentals right. Now, it could work if what you're looking for is efficiency, but if you think it's going to be more effective, that's a harder proposition to deliver on.
Before I let you go, one last, just looking to the future a little bit. If you had to
Of course.
predict the next big challenge in getting people to sit still and watch something, what do you think it is, given just the plethora of screens and behaviors we're now trying to grapple with?
This reminds me of the 1960s, and the Children's Television Workshop came around and started discovering how to, with research, by the way, with great research, trying to figure out how to do TV shows for kids. And one of the things they learned is, that it should be shorter duration. So you should have optimally 20-second clips instead of what was at the time really long clips. And then they got criticized for that. They said, you have destroyed the entire system of education. Now kids are coming to class and they want things that are really short. You popularized the idea that content needs to be short. It's a change. I think that the changes are here. We're not going to put the genie back in the bottle. All we can do is figure out how to ebb and flow with it. And the key to that is understanding good research. There are parts of storytelling that are eternal, and there are parts that are not. And we need to understand which are which so that we're capitalizing on the enduring features of story, and we're adapting and responding to those which can be optimized. A lot of it comes back to attention and holding attention. That's going to be more and more challenging as we go into the future.
I agree. It's definitely a heady era we're getting into, and this is great stuff to talk about. Thanks for the time, and thanks for giving us a little bit of insight on all this. Thanks.
And thank you, Brian, for your continued excellence in journalism.
Wow, thank you. Wow, it's a mutual admiration society. I appreciate it.